everyone, and welcome to Master Otto's workshop. Today we're making reproductions of Viking brooch knives. These are small utility knives that hung from a Viking woman's apron brooch. I'm going to take you through the detailed process of making one of these knives, from the blade to the handle to the sheath and the suspension chain. Let's talk brass sheet for the brooch knives. Since these sheaths are so small, I would use a lighter brass sheet like a 26 gauge. I've made the sheaths out of 30 gauge. The problem with 30 is it's so thin and light that you can actually rip out the rivets as you're peening them with 30. So 30 is a little light. 26 is a nice compromise. It's thin, easy to work. Now if you're working on full-size Seax knives, the brass sheet, you can probably go with a 20 gauge, 18 gauge even maybe if you want a nice thick. But for the little tiny brooch knives, I would stick with 26 gauge sheet brass. Next we have to make a template for the brass that you see here. There's a lot of considerations that goes into this. Look at a lot of historical examples of Seaxes and figure out what kind of pattern you want. So for instance, this one, I'll point out some features to consider. This one is straight across to here and then it tapers in. Pay attention to the shape of the brass here and here. Look at historical examples. You want to make this these two tapers aesthetically pleasing. This one tracks up to here. There's a little bit of a hump right here at the transition from the handle to the blade. There's a little bit of a hump. Then it tapers gracefully up. And then this is actually tapered as well, curved as well. This is not straight. This is a nice little curve here. Here, look at this one. Here's another example. This is a copy of an original. This is actually two pieces of brass. This is one piece here, and this is a separate piece here. Again, this is straight because the handle of the knife is parallel. It's straight. And then this has got a very steep point up here. So take a look at the historical examples and figure out what you want to do. So for our knife, I've got a parallel, a straight handle. So this part of the sheath is going to be straight. First, what we're going to do is we're going to come up with a template using paper. And then we're going to transfer that template to a cardboard and then finally to brass. So this is the right angle now. And my knife is going to sit, this is the leather, that would correspond there. Let's put the knife in here. So here's the point. This is where the point of the knife ends. And we can actually mark that on the leather as well. So that's going to be right there. This is going to get covered up, this pencil mark, because you're going to want to put the tip of the knife kind of in the middle of the brass. That protects you from the tip of the knife. So the total length of the sheath will probably end up right about here. That's how long this sheath will be. Right about there. So next, the brass is going to come to right about here, because this is where that crease line is. You just follow the crease line out right about to here. So next we'll look at the transition point. So that's going to be right about here. The brass is going to be straight to here. Here's the tip of the knife. We want, maybe this much we're talking this much. That protects you from the point of your knife in the sheath. So we're going to want about this much here. Then we have to make this line kind of graceful. So start perpendicular and curve up. And then here's the point. Now we have to decide what we're going to do with the rest of it. Well, like I said before, what I want is a very tall sheath, kind of like this, very tall here. So what we're going to do, I've got this much leather to work with, so I don't want it that high. So we're going to, and I want an exaggerated transition point, so we're going to come up here. So let me draw this out now in a Sharpie so you can see better. So there's the center line. I'm thinking this is the shape we're going to come up with. All right, so there's our template. We fold it here, here, line it up. So is that aesthetically pleasing to you? Here we go. We got the pattern transferred over to cardboard. This is a good time to talk about workflow and how we're going to finish this up. So now that we have our pattern, we're going to trace this pattern onto brass, cut out a piece of brass to mount to our pitch plate. Then we're going to stamp and chase the pattern on the brass. A consideration is, if you're going to do vertical lines that match up with your leather tooling, you'll need to mark that on your pattern and transfer that to your brass. Once we've finished chasing and stamping the brass, we're going to cut it out. First we're going to cut it out rough, then we're going to cut this line precisely along the pattern so that we can mount this, place it on our leather. This outside edge we're going to cut about 1/4 inch wide, so that when we put in our rivets we have a little extra room and support while we're peening rivets. But this inner edge we are going to cut precisely on the pattern line. After it's been cut out, we will then glue it and clamp it onto here, let it dry. We'll drill rivet holes and peen the rivets so that the brass is now permanently attached here. Then we'll cut the leather off, the excess leather, and we'll take this to the grinder, a belt grinder, and we'll grind this outside edge to final shape. Alrighty, that's going to be the work process. Now let's talk about chasing or stamping the brass for the sheath. This is my setup. It's all homemade. So for the pitch pot, basically I got a cheap aluminum bowl. I filled the bottom of the bowl most of the way up with lead, and then I poured pitch. Or I basically took chunks of pitch, covered the lead, and then took a torch and melted it so it's got a nice smooth surface. For the base, I made a little wood box and I filled it with sand, and that allows me to tilt the pitch pot at whatever angle I want while I'm working on the pitch pot or on the brass. For tools, I of course have my loops. at my age, they're a necessity. This is my handle for driving the chasing tools. It's made out of crabapple. These are some of my homemade tools for chasing. We've got our design traced out on the brass piece cut out and mounted to the pitch pot. I've drawn the lines that correspond to the tooling lines on my leather, and we're ready to get started with some stamping and chasing. Alright, I finished tooling. That's as much as I'm going to do, I think. It's all pretty warped. We're going to hammer it flat, come back and take another look at it. We've got a rough cutout. We're going to clean up this inner edge here in a bit. I'll show you how. You see I've left maybe 1/8 of an inch around the outside for rivet support. We'll grind that down later, but right now we're going to work on this inner edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend this in half with these jewelry pliers, and then we'll take it over to the grinder. Make sure we get it folded properly. Alright, we have to hold this even, and let's go ahead and start grinding this down. We've got this ground down now on both sides, symmetrical on both sides. I've sanded off the burrs. Let's do a test fit. I think that's going to look fine. We'll go ahead now and clean this up, degrease it, get all these marks off, polish this brass up, and then we'll glue it and clamp it to the leather and let it dry real good before we come back and put in the rivets. We have the brass glued to the sheath and in the clamps. Now, the purpose of this glue up is just to hold the brass in place until you can get it riveted. The rivets are what really hold the brass in position. But it's hard to work with and hard to rivet properly if the brass is flopping all over the place. So when you glue it with contact cement, it'll hold it all in place long enough for you to drill holes and put rivets in. One other trick is that this contact cement will not dry under brass. It'll take a long time. So when you apply the glue to the brass and the leather, make sure it's all completely dry before you try putting it together. I actually take a heat gun to the brass and heat it up a little bit. When it comes time to drill rivet holes in your sheath, I mic the size of the rivets and then select a drill bit that is just slightly undersized. Then I drive the rivets through the hole with a hammer. This gives me a nice tight fit, and you don't need to use a brass washer on the other end. I clip my rivets down to about 1/16 of an inch tall. This is still a little bit too proud, and I'm going to clip it down some more. I've got a block of steel for setting rivets, and I don't know if you can see, I've actually drilled some holes for dome-headed rivets, and I've rounded the edge. This has got a sharp edge here. If you put a round-headed rivet here and start setting it, this sharp edge will mar the leather, but sometimes you need the rivet hole close to the edge, so this edge is rounded, and for when I don't have a rivet close to an edge, I prefer to have the round-headed rivet hole out in the center to make sure that I don't mar the leather when I'm driving rivets. This is just mild steel, a hunk of mild steel. This is my 2-pound ball peen hammer for setting rivets. You've got to round off the edges of the peening face, otherwise you're going to have stray hammer marks on your brass. When peening small rivets over thin brass, I like to use a whole lot of rapid-fire gentle hammer strokes to peen the rivet to shape.
Once I've got a nice mushroom head formed, I can go ahead and give it a few good hard whacks, and then flip it over to the ball side and dome the rivet shaft. I finished with this section of brass. Now it's time to start working on the next section. Here are a couple of knives that are finished. After you have finished setting all of the rivets, cut off the excess leather at the top of the spine, take the knife to the grinder, and grind the top of the spine to the final shape. You can leave the brass all nice and shiny, but I like to add a patina with black magic. I'll show you how to use black magic. First, polish and degrease the brass. Then apply a liberal amount of black magic, ensuring that you fill in all of the depressions. Once black magic is fully dried, it's time to buff it off. First, remove as much as you can with a dry paper towel, and then using a fine Scotch Guard pad, buff the brass. I find that using steel wool for the buffing tends to get deeper into the recessions and takes off too much of the patina.